Members of the Board of Visitors, trustees of the VMI agencies, our special guest, Secretary James, distinguished guests, faculty and staff, and ladies and gentlemen of the Corps of Cadets, good morning and welcome. Today is Founders Day at VMI, and before I introduce our guest speaker, I would like to say a few words. For many decades, we have celebrated the Institute's anniversary on November the 11th. It's an important day to remember our beginnings and also to look to our future. This is an opportunity for us to review the impressive record of growth and development since 11 November 1839. At that time, 23 cadets first matriculated at the Institute. The VMI founders had a solid vision that provides a source of strength and inspiration that we certainly do not want to forget. Two of the founders of VMI, who were also its first two professors, General Francis H. Smith and Colonel J.T.L. Preston, taught the incoming class of 1839. As we research their early writings, we see that they built an institute upon timeless principles that certainly are still true today. These principles are worth revisiting, I think, on a regular basis, but one in particular is worth focusing on today, and that is honor. For Preston and Smith, a commitment to personal honor was a necessary part of life and a foundation that must be embedded in all the training, whether academic, military, or physical. And while no formal written VMI honor code exists from those early days, their early writings and correspondence make it very clear that honor was an inspiration and foundation of your school. And every cadet memorizes Preston's statement on the parapet, describing, and I know you know this, quote, a crowd of honorable youths pressing up the hill of science with noble emulation, a gratifying spectacle and honor to our country and our state, and so forth, end quote. We might suggest this statement was the foundation, the vision for VMI into the future. Preston explained that the goal for the founders was to create an institution where parents would be glad to send their children. And this institute would help guide cadets form good habits and morals needed to uphold one's honor. Smith further expanded upon this when he wrote during his first year as superintendent, and I quote, "Here will be a school patronized by the state, and the essential principle of which will be a sense of honor and duty. Here the young student will find in each one of his associates the honorable feelings of a soldier," end quote. The Institute was firmly grounded with a foundation of honor to one's family, its community, and country. For you see, honor has always been a cornerstone of VMI since its inception. And I think it's important for us to note that Smith spoke of the Cadet Code of Honor as an unwritten law for the inner life of a cadet, written more on the mind and the heart than on a document. And years later, in 1908, the VMI Honor Code was codified and published for the first time. However, that is not to say that before this time there was a problem or lack of honor. Rather, the concept and essence of personal honor remains unwritten. Honor is more than just a list of do's and don'ts, and as our cadets know today, we say honor is a way of life. For 180 years, VMI has built on an impressive record of graduates who've accomplished many achievements as leaders in the military, in the business world, the public sector, academia, and our community. And just like the founders, we report today an optimism for VMI's future, but also a firm understanding of the foundation that makes it so special. As we move forward from the founding of VMI into modern times, one of the wonderful benefits that our cadets have today is the excellent selection of guest speakers that come to VMI to challenge, motivate, and educate. And one way to learn more about leadership and ethics is to hear from those with considerable experience. On this Founders Day, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce the Honorable Deborah Lee James, formerly the 23rd Secretary of the United States Air Force. Secretary James has served in many positions in both the public and private sector throughout her distinguished career. She recently released her book, Aim High, Chart Your Course and Find Success, which describes many of her experiences and provides guidance from lessons learned. A graduate of Duke University and the Columbia University International Affairs program, her original plan was to join the State Department. However, just as plans change for many of us, Early in her career, she took a position with the Department of the Army at the Pentagon. And while this was an unexpected turn, she now writes about what a great opportunity it was in her life. And from this starting point, her career then led to working for the House Armed Services Committee on Capitol Hill. And there she made numerous connections and learned how to accomplish a mission in a vast, complex political environment. She also learned that resilience and gratitude are instrumental in any situation in life, whether on the job, a military assignment, or even within one's family. Secretary James was then selected as the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Reserve Affairs in the Clinton administration and helped transform how the National Guard and Reserves would be utilized. And today they are an integral operational asset in this long war on terror. And after many years in public service, Secretary James went on to a career in the private sector working for SAIC, a wonderful large defense contractor in Northern Virginia. She led a $2 billion business unit as the president of the technical and engineering sector. Her career progressed at a rapid pace when the call came from the Obama administration in 2013. And after many years away from the government, she accepted the challenge and responsibility to become the Secretary of the United States Air Force. And during her tenure, she helped direct over 600,000 active duty Guard, Reserve, and civilian employees and oversaw a budget of $130 billion. Today, she serves on the board of numerous organizations. She continues to speak with considerable wisdom today about the lessons that she learned from her broad experiences in public service and in private business. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me this morning in warmly welcoming Secretary Deborah Lee James to the Virginia Military Institute. Madam Secretary.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you, General Peay, for that very, very nice introduction. I want all of you to know that I am truly thrilled to be here today. This, by the way, is my first visit to VMI. I hope it won't be my last. But there's at least 3 reasons why I'm super excited to be here today. Number 1 is the opportunity to reconnect and see this gentleman again, General Peay. He and I served together. He alluded to this, but he and I served together in the Pentagon more than 20 years ago when he was the Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army and I was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Reserve Affairs. And we didn't have a lot of time this morning. We had a little bit of time as an office call. Of course, I know of his reputation in our United States Army and all that he did there as an officer, but it was fantastic to catch up on your 16 years here at VMI and all of the changes and all of the advancements that have been made here at the school under your leadership. Now, I look back at the man, and by the way, I had the opportunity to look back at some pictures of he and I back in the day, and I will say that he had darker hair back in those days. And as for me, I had more voluminous hair because, after all, it was the early 1990s. But other than that, you look exactly the same and you seem to be thriving, you and Pam here at VMI. So it is just so fantastic to see you again. The second reason why I'm so thrilled to be here is because it's fantastic to be in front of such a distinguished audience with members of the Board of Visitors, the trustees, the faculty. We have alumni in the audience. I know there are members of the community who are here. I dare say there's some parents, but most of all, it's fantastic. And I'm looking out. I can see you. There's a big contingent of the Cadets who are here today. So thank you very much for turning out, all of you. And I also want to give a shout out to Cadet Emma Noble, who is my escort for the day, and she has the very good sense to be commissioning soon into our United States Air Force. So thank you so much, Emma, as well. About the only one I can't see in the audience is Mo the kangaroo. He must be AWOL today, but maybe I'll get to see him on my next visit. Finally, I want you to know the third reason I'm thrilled to be here is because what an occasion. It is the joint occasion of VMI's Founders Day, so happy 180th birthday today, as well as this is Veterans Day, the day that we commemorate and celebrate all of those who have served in America's armed forces. And I think, as mostly everyone knows from history, This day, which we now call Veterans Day, was once long ago known as Armistice Day. It originally started 100 years ago as Armistice Day, and it related back to the dark days of World War I, the war to end all wars, as it was known back then. And it also related to the hopeful time when the guns finally fell silent, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. The armistice, which was signed, followed soon thereafter, and of course the nations of the world vowed, never ever again will we enter into hostilities. Alas, as we all know, that part just simply did not come true. VMI certainly has a long and proud tradition of producing strong and principled leaders for our military, our government, and our business community. Now, the best news for all of you cadets of today is that you have some pretty broad shoulders to stand upon and some high standards to live by. Within a few short years, you too will follow in the footsteps of some of these renowned graduates, like the military and political leaders of an earlier era, the iconic George Marshall and George Patton, or like those leaders who have served more recently, General Peay, my good friend, former Chief of Staff of the Air Force, John Jumper, Darren McDew, also of the United States Air Force, or the leaders of today who are serving right now as we speak, Governor Ralph Northam of Virginia, Army Secretary Ryan McCarthy, and Virginia State Delegate Jennifer Carroll Foy. Some of you will choose business careers, and you have fantastic VMI role models here too, like Tom Watson, former CEO of the Unum Group, and with whom I now serve on a startup named Locator X. Wes Foster, the founder of Long & Foster, Thomas Gottwald, the chairman of the board of New Market Corporation, or Lara Chambers, founder of the Tyler Development Group and a member of your board of visitors today. No matter what your ultimate pursuits may be, here's really the bottom line that you need to remember. VMI will have prepared you well for a life of purpose, service to others, integrity, and ultimately, when your time comes, leadership. And with this preparation, your job soon will be to lead the rest of us into the future. And there is no question in my mind, so get ready, that the future is going to be complex, it's going to be messy, dare I say it is going to be fractured in many, many ways. I know that's been a discussion on campus of late. It will be characterized by unprecedented change, disruption in business and politics, technological innovation, interconnectivity of virtually all devices and systems that you can think of, and new approaches in the workforce. It will be a future full of both opportunity as well as danger. Now, keeping up with all of this, remaining agile, staying one step ahead of your adversary or one step ahead of your competition in business, leading your subordinates through change, all of this is enough to make anybody's head spin. So just how can you, or how can anyone, survive, let alone thrive, in such an environment? Well, I don't pretend to have all of the answers on how everybody in every profession can succeed and find purpose in their life, but I do have a formula that at least has worked for me. And I wrote the book, Aim High, Chart Your Course, and Find Success, in part to share this formula with others. It is part memoir, it's part leadership lessons learned, and it's part how do you get things done in very difficult environments where there is constant change and turbulence. It is a book, first and foremost, centered on what I consider to be the most powerful innovation of all, and that is the power of our people and of our own critical thinking. It's a book about the value of a diverse workforce, the importance of communications, relationships, and personal growth. Ultimately, it's a book about how you, whoever you may be, can have a big impact within your organizations and for the people of your organizations. And that is so even if you're like me, which is someone who has traditionally looked different and had a different background than most of the other people in the room. Certainly, the rest of the people at the decision-making table often were different than me. Finally, it's a book about building resilience, learning from failure, and about understanding that, particularly if you are a young person, It's a book about understanding that if you see a senior leader and you admire that person and you imagine that person must have led a perfect career and made all of the right moves and had a perfect life in the background, what you need to understand is that is probably not the case. So that is to say, if you too find yourself in a position of at times lacking confidence or becoming overwhelmed, or that you suffer a tragedy or a disappointment or a failure in your life, or you come up against the inevitable jerks, and you will meet them in your life. If this happens to you, remember, you are not alone. Others have gone before you. You can bounce back, and you can come out the other side even stronger. This has certainly been the story of my life and my career, some of which, again, I chronicle in the book. Now, like I said, I wrote the book in order to share this basic formula, but I have to admit, once I got into it, I kind of regretted it because it was a really, really hard project. Never had written a book before, probably will never do so again. But every day when I would sit down and I would try to begin writing, writer's block would hit me right smack dab in the face, and it would drag me down. But at the end of the day, I stuck with it, I powered through it, I completed the project, and thinking back on it, the way I really ultimately did it was I fell back on my affinity, my liking of making lists. Now, I'm sure there's other list makers in the audience. I'm sure I'm not alone in this. I remember feeling like I was going through withdrawal when Dave Letterman went off the air with his top 10 list. I always look forward to that every day. But I would make lists for things that I needed to do the following day, things that I should have done today but didn't get done, things that I wanted my husband to do for me. Lists were the way I lived my life. It's how we keep track of and remember and make sense of multifaceted tasks. So I ended up finally pulling through and writing this book based on 3 essential actions that I realized have helped me throughout my life to find professional and personal fulfillment. So I want to tell you about these 3 actions, including some underlying strategies that go with each action. But before I have to take one step back and tell you about the bluff. Now, for those of you in the audience who have served in the military, you probably already know about the bluff, so hang with me. But for everybody else, I'm not talking about bluffing in poker. There's a different type of bluff. So here's the story on the bluff. I was a brand new Secretary of the Air Force on day 1, and I went in for my first appointment, and it was a briefing. And like just about every briefing I ever took in the Air Force, whether it was decisional or whether it was just a informational briefing, there would be perhaps hundreds, but at least dozens, if not hundreds, of pages of PowerPoint. PowerPoint is the coin of the realm in the Pentagon. And the only way I would get through that first briefing and all of the follow-on briefings was the bluff, which is one of many acronyms in the Pentagon, but this one stands for bottom line up front. So each one of these very lengthy briefings would start with one chart that would give you the key takeaways that you should remember as you would then go through the rest of the briefing. And this turned out to be a godsend for me. So here comes my bluff. Here's the bottom line up front to aim high, chart your course, and find success. The first key action is you simply have to chart and navigate your own course. Seize the initiative. Don't expect that anyone is going to do this for you. Now, we're going to come back to each one of these one by one. The second pillar is lead and inspire teams. So nothing happens as a single individual these days. It is all about the teamwork, and if you are the leader, your job is not simply to tell people what to do, but rather it is to inspire this team so that the team will want to and will in fact follow you in the direction that you seek. And the third, quite simply, is get things done. Because after all, isn't that what all of us in our respective professions, even at home, isn't this what we're all trying to do, is to achieve certain goals and to get things done in life? Now, I didn't come to these 3 actions quickly. I certainly didn't know these actions per se when I was in my 20s, but rather I learned them gradually over the course of my life, which basically has been a series of ups and downs and zigs and zags. So now I just want to tell you a little bit more about my backstory that you wouldn't necessarily glean from reading my bio. So let's go back to the beginning. I was born and raised in a small town in New Jersey, and as a young person, when I was the age of the cadets here in the room, I was extremely driven, and I knew exactly what I wanted to be in my life. And you heard General Peay reference it. I wanted to be in the State Department. I wanted to be a Foreign Service officer and represent the foreign policy of the United States around the world with our allies, partners, and at times with our adversaries. That was literally my goal from the age of about 15 years old forward. So throughout high school, college, and graduate school, I relentlessly pursued this dream. So that is to say, I did probably what all of you are doing. I took the right courses which related to, in some way, the Foreign Service. I got good grades. I learned a foreign language. I traveled abroad and did study abroad programs. I even got an internship in the State Department as a 22-year-old, which was really hard to come by, but I landed that position and did my best at it. So when the time came and I graduated from Columbia University, I moved down to the Washington, D.C. area. I rented my first apartment, which was a very heady experience, and I applied to the Foreign Service, which some of you may know has both a written exam and then there's an oral portion to the interview process. So I went through the written, I went through the orals, and with the greatest of confidence, I felt like I was crushing it on both ends. I went home to my apartment and I waited for my acceptance letter to come in the mail. But in fact, as you heard, I didn't get an acceptance letter. I got a letter of rejection. And I just remember crashing. I remember crashing. At the age of 24, my life was flashing before my very eyes. Because you see, I had just, in my eyes, wasted 7 or 8 years of my young life pursuing a dream which just literally went up in smoke before my very eyes. So I went to bed and I literally pulled the covers over my head and didn't get out of bed for days. That's how depressed I was. Well, about 5 days into it, I threw the covers off and I finally got up because I realized, oh my heavens, I've rented an apartment, I have financial obligations, and I have no job. So I had to find a job. I applied everywhere else I could think of in the federal government, and finally I got one and only one acceptance, and that was to be a civilian, a program analyst in the Department of the Army. So now, step back a minute. What in those days did I know about the Army? And the answer is nothing. What in those days did I particularly care, or was I inspired by the idea of being in a military-oriented job? And the answer is, frankly, I was not. I was supremely disappointed, but I needed a job, and so I took that one and only one offer that I had, and I threw myself into it, and I did the best that I could. And then, a few months into it, the most remarkable things started happening for me. The first thing that happened was, wow, the material that I was working on was really interesting. I never thought of it before. I had never been exposed to the defense issues before, but it turned out to feel very purposeful to me. It turned out to be really interesting. I remember reading my morning news every day back in those years, and whatever the headline of the day was, we were deep in the Cold War at the time, but whatever the headline of the day, I could imagine a little piece of my contribution fulfilling or going toward those overall headlines of the day. So the work, as I said, became very, very meaningful to me, and I became very inspired by it. Who knew? But it happened to me. The second thing that happened to me was I got lucky. I fell in with a fantastic group of people. So this was my first team environment. And of course, they were all older, they were all male. Most of them, or I'll say half and half, military and civilian. So again, they were quite a bit different from me, but they took an interest in me, they took me under their wing. It was a fantastic first team environment. We had good camaraderie. And the third thing, again, I got lucky on this one, a really, really tremendous first boss. He was a 2-star general. And once again, not only did he give me the feedback that you would expect a boss to give, but he became what I consider to be my first great mentor in life, who also made some connections for me, opened some doors for me that I could not have opened by myself at the age of 24. It was because of one of those door openings and the fact that I was willing to take the risk and walk through that door that landed me the position on the House Armed Services Committee staff. And I credit that second boss with being a fantastic mentor as well to me. I ended up spending 10 years on the staff of the House Armed Services Committee. So now I'm about 12 years into government service. And no longer do I have zero exposure to the military or zero knowledge, but now I have quite a bit of knowledge about defense budgets, defense policy. Certainly I understood very well the workings of the Congress, which impacts everything that we do in the military. And so I had built up a portfolio of competence, a portfolio of knowledge, 12 years into it. From there, I transitioned over to become an Assistant Secretary of Defense. It was for Reserve Affairs, so that's the National Guard and Reserve Forces, in the Pentagon. And I was only 34 years old at the time. So once again, I was quite a bit different from most of the other people who were senior leaders at that time. And this was a tremendous experience for me on a number of levels, but I'll just give you two. This was the position that thrust me literally overnight from being an individual contributor on Capitol Hill to becoming the leader of an immediate team in the Pentagon of about 180 people, and a person with responsibility for people way beyond 180. So I was learning leadership on the fly, kind of OJT, how to lead people. It also thrust me into the world of public communications, which I don't know if you're like me, but speaking publicly before an audience literally crippled me with fear for years and years and years. I then, after 5 years in that job, transitioned to the private sector, but I did so once again with great confidence. I'd had a great 17-year run in the government, and I decided I'm now going to try my hand in the private sector. And with great confidence, I got out of the government and took that first job and went into another period of what I'll call decline or semi-crash, and had really a tough, rough patch for the first 3 years of my time in the private sector. And looking back on that, transitions, let's all face it, transitions are really hard. You'll see when you graduate from VMI, you too may go through a difficult transition. There's change, you're trying to learn the ropes of what's what. So part of it was me and the difficulties there, but part of it was I came up across for the first time in my life a couple of really tough, I'll even say bad leaders, bad bosses. One was rather capricious and micromanaging. The other, I'll just flat out say, was a jerk. Abusive to people, not the kind of person that you want to have in a leadership position. But basically, it was a tough 3 years, and I had a hard time hitting my stride. And I began to have all those same lack of confidence feelings coming back, just like I had when I didn't make it into the State Department. But after hanging in there, trying to have as much positivity, embracing the change as much as possible, I finally transitioned out beyond those bad bosses, and that's where the mentor from 20 years earlier in the House Armed Services Committee introduced me to this company called SAIC, the company that John Jumper, by the way, ultimately led, and where I ultimately got to serve with him in a different capacity. And it was really at SAIC that I hit my stride beyond government. And over the course of a 12-year period at that company, little by little, gradually, and using different techniques, I was able to actually transform myself into a business person, even though I didn't have the traditional business training or an MBA. I had different jobs over time at SAIC. They gave me a broad view of the company. So some of it was business development. I got into a general manager position over a super exciting program. Some of you may remember the MRAP, Mine Resistant Ambush Protected. So this was a program that literally was important for saving the lives of our troops in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And so you want to talk about feeling purpose in government? Yep, we understand that, but this was purpose, really important purpose that I was feeling from my business life. And I also was the head of communications and government affairs during a period in the company in which we were engulfed in a scandal where a few amongst us had acted in such an unethical way that they had literally brought down very bad consequences upon the heads of thousands of other people. So I not only got a good reminder of the importance of integrity and ethics during this period, but it also gave me a front row seat to the world of crisis management and how crises ought to be handled. I then became a sector president, as you heard General Peay say, and this was another really interesting part. very turbulent time in the company. We were splitting into two separate public companies. And so you want to talk about change in the workforce and people worrying about their futures. This was huge transformation for everyone. So that was a good learning experience for me, because I learned that if you don't bring the entire team along on your change journey, if you leave certain segments behind, and if you don't get the people part of your equation done correctly, then all other parts may well crumble. Parts like strategy or technology or organizational constructs. Ultimately, it all comes down to people. Then I got this unbelievable call out of the blue that asked me to go back into the government and become the Secretary of the Air Force. And after a period of not being sure I wanted to take that risk, I decided I would, and I was able to bring my previous experience, the Hill, the previous Pentagon, the knowledge of budgets, business, et cetera, to the table, but also recognizing that, far cry, I didn't know everything. There was plenty that I didn't know, and I wasn't strong in everything. But here again, that's why building a strong team and relying on the team is so important. Now, at this point in the story, I have to digress for just a moment for another story, and that is, when I was Secretary of the Air Force, this is 35 years now into my working life, I had the opportunity to meet the Secretary of State, who at the time was John Kerry. Now, ordinarily, when senior officials meet, they have an agenda. We're going to talk about foreign military sales or something that we want to accomplish in NATO, something of this ilk. But my mind was racing ahead because I didn't want to talk about any of that. What I really wanted to say to John Kerry, I held myself back, but what I really wanted to say was, thank you that you rejected me 35 years ago from the State Department. Because you know what? My life went in a different direction. But looking back, I can't imagine that I would have had a more fulfilling and purposeful and enjoyable professional career than the one that I found ultimately with the military. Because even in my business career, the business was in support of the military. Now, you may think that's the all of me, and that's quite a bit, but there's more to the story. Because along the way of this career that I've described to you, I had a full life beyond my work. So I was married, I was divorced, I was remarried. My husband Frank is with me here today. So there's zigs and zags and ups and downs that we all go through in our personal lives as well. I have two beautiful children who are now in their mid-30s and one beautiful granddaughter, 8 months old. I raise these two children sometimes as a married parent, sometimes as a single parent. So I feel like I've learned a thing or two about how one can ultimately balance or find your right balance between a busy schedule at the office or at work and also having a fulfilling home life, personal life. So if you add all that up and say, okay, well, what exactly did you learn from those ups and downs and positives and negatives? Well, let me now come back to those three essential actions and give you a few of the underlying strategies that I learned along the way. So the first one, remember, was chart and navigate your course, which is take control of your own destiny. Don't expect anybody else to do it for you. Now, here comes some of my strategies. Everybody at all ages, including me at my age, everybody ought to have, in my judgment, a plan A. You ought to have some belief or knowledge of where you want to go in life, what you want to do as your next step, and you need to be building toward that as best as you can. But while you're pursuing your plan A, prepare to pivot to what I'll call plan B. So that is the State Department story in droves. Sometimes your plan A won't work out for you, and you need to have your eyes open for another opportunity that might be every bit as interesting, although you haven't thought of it before. Truth is, you don't know what you're going to like until you expose yourself to different types of jobs and opportunities. For when one door closes, I guarantee you there will always be another door that will open. But you might have to take a risk and go through that door and try something that you hadn't thought of before. And for heaven's sakes, as you're creating your plan A and preparing to pivot to a possible plan B, look for something that has purpose simply beyond earning your paycheck. We all need our paycheck, but those who have both reasonable compensation and feeling of great purpose in their lives and profession. That's where the magic lies. So look for something where you can contribute to the betterment of others. Here at VMI, I don't think that's going to be a problem. You're all destined for this, but that is really what makes the difference between an okay job, okay profession, and a really fantastic work experience. And learn from your mistakes as well. There's always key learnings in any mistake or failure. Another strategy, you heard me say several times about the importance of my mentors. Everybody at all ages, and particularly young people, ought to seek out mentors. And here again, I think VMI shines. I understand all of the seniors are mentors to freshmen. That's fantastic. That's exactly the way it needs to be, and keep that up throughout your life. Look for those mentoring opportunities where you can be mentored, and when you're in a position to do so, for heaven's sakes, give back. And then work your network. So everybody in this room ought to be in your network, and your neighbors, your parents and the parents' friends. These are all people in your network of today. But as you go through, you will collect more people along the way in your life. Make sure that you keep in touch and value them. Because in my case, after that first State Department fiasco, I never again did a cold call to try to find a job, ever again. It all was one thing led to the next, because of the mentors that I had, the network that I had, and these were people who would point me in a direction and possibly make a connection or open a door. The next strategy I would tell you is hang in there with positivity, especially during times of transition, and don't give up, or at least don't give up too quickly. Now, one caveat, if you run into a situation of immoral or unethical behavior, that is not something that you should hang in there with positivity over. But if it's simply an organization where there's a lot of change going on, you need to go on the offense to understand what that change is, and you need to embrace it as best as you can and help the boss find solutions. And for heaven's sakes, and this is equally true in your private lives, whatever bad experience you may encounter or difficult people that you may come across in your life, try hard to understand what their dynamics are, why they are doing what they are doing, why they are acting the way they are acting. Learn what drives difficult people is the bottom line there, because 9 times out of 10, it's usually something to do with them. It's some degree of insecurity on their part. And if you can understand that, it may not change their behavior, but at least it ought to help you, and it certainly did help me, to understand that I shouldn't take it personally, that it had everything to do with them and less to do about me. The next strategy is learn, evolve, and reinvent. You notice my story had a lot of reinvention and learning new things. So when you graduate from VMI, you'll probably say, wow, I'm so glad I don't have to, study anymore and don't have to keep this up. Well, your study will become of a different fashion. You need to have continual learning in your life. So if you are a technologist, you're going to have to stress yourself to keep up on the latest technology. If you're a liberal arts major, you too need to learn enough about technology so that you can become conversant in what's going on. For some of you deeply scientific folks, perhaps you need to polish up your public speaking or your interpersonal skills. So there's all sorts of ways to continue your learning, and I really encourage you to do so, because if your learning stagnates, then so will your career. All right, the next pillar is lead and inspire teams. So no one is an island these days. It's all about the team. And I will tell you, the first thing here in my mind is what I call speak up and listen deeply. So this is the power of communications. You as the leader will need to be able to translate to the rest of the team the case for action, the case for urgency, and very importantly, you'll have to translate to every member of the team why that person as an individual is hugely important to the team. What is the value that everybody brings individually to the team? And don't forget, while you're polishing these communication skills, at least half of communication is effective and deep listening. So often these days we're so anxious to say what we're going to say that we don't listen properly to what other people are saying. And I guarantee you, if you work on this skill, it will make you a better leader, a more authentic leader. You'll come to know your people as real people, show a degree of empathy and leadership. All of this will be important for your success going forward. The next strategy is about the importance of always being that role model for ethical behavior. Don't ever sacrifice or scrimp on ethics. And as you've learned here at VMI, it's an individual sport. That is, we're all charged with acting ethically, but it is also a team sport. It's so critical that if we see something wrong going on in our environment, that we either report it, we intervene, we get someone else to intervene. Don't ever sacrifice upon your ethics, because if you do, you likely are going to sacrifice not only the reputation of your own good family name, but also of your organization. Next is put people first, and I really deeply believe this one to be true. Nowadays, people don't want to simply be told what to do, but they want to understand the context of why. They want to be engaged and listened to have their thoughts and input reviewed appropriately. They want to see a path for professional development. Frequent feedback, far more frequent feedback is expected nowadays than, say, when I was coming up through the ranks. And they want to enjoy their employee experience. So this is to say, not be micromanaged, not be weighed down by too much red tape and things of this nature. And compensation nowadays, that's table stakes. It is definitely table stakes in the business world. If you don't have that going for you, then you've got nothing. You won't be able to compete for people. But so much more now is expected to put people first, and I've named you just several of them. The next strategy is play to your strengths, but within that great team. This means that you have to be self-aware enough to know what you're strong at, what you're good at, but where you're not so strong and where you need some development. And that's where you need to leverage other members of the team and celebrate rather than fear their strengths. Lead a full life beyond work, very, very important. So you've been very focused on your lives here at VMI and your studies. Soon you'll go out into the military, you'll go out into the business world. If you're anything like me, you are going to be doubling down for success all the way, and that's fantastic. But for heaven's sakes, don't forget to love your families, pursue a hobby, have something fulfilling on the outside world that will give you happiness. And if you do, once again, I will guarantee you, you will be a better rounded and you will be a more productive person on the job. Now, those are the first two essentials: chart, navigate, lead, and inspire. The final one, before I conclude, is get things done. I maintain, having been in the business community, having been in the government, and having led my private life, that when we are attempting to get things done in a confusing and turbulent type of an environment, there is a 5-step repeatable process that we can all use to accomplish those goals and to get things done. So let me now give you this 5-step process, and in the book you'll see that I use case studies from when I was Secretary of the Air Force and apply this process to trying to solve problems or at least advance the ball and leave our Air Force in a better place than the Air Force that I founded in 2013. So here comes the process. Number 1 is investigate. So before we launch to change the world or to change something big, let's slow down just a little bit and get the facts. What does the data tell us? And very importantly, not just the data and the facts and figures, but what do the stakeholders, the people of the organization, think about it? And if you're like me, the Secretary of the Air Force, that meant speaking with the top 4-star generals, but it also meant doing a little bit more investigating, getting all the way down to the flight line and understanding what the captains were saying, what the junior enlisted were saying. So people and people's input is very, very important in the investigate phase. The next phase is communicate. So after we've figured out what we think we know what the problem is now, we need to explain it to others. We need to build the case for action. Might be within your immediate team that you need to build that case for action. If you're Secretary of the Air Force, it might be you need to explain it to 660,000 people and to 535 members of Congress. So depending on the organization, the communicate phase can be smallish or it can be very large. And although I'm saying communicate phase, it really is a constant effort. You have to keep communicating throughout any major change. The third is activate. Okay, we understand the problem, we've built the case for action and explained it. Now what are we going to do? What are we going to do that is different? So this is the phase where you would come up with new initiatives, programs. I highly recommend start small and scale when taking on these new things. And double down on the people issues, because changes will affect the people, and people will either come along or they will resist according to whether or not you're able to double down on these people issues. The fourth phase is iterate. So whatever we came up in the activate phase, whatever the initiatives are, you're never going to get it right the first time. There's always going to be something that you either need to negotiate or that you need to maybe jettison because it's not producing the results that you want. So the point is, don't be locked into the initial program. Be prepared to add or subtract, because your first plan will always need some sort of adjustment once you realize what will work and what will not. And last is to have follow-up, and follow-up needs to be relentless, because nothing happens quickly in government or in business, and change takes time, and you will need to invest a lot of your personal time in the follow-up in order to get things done. And I highly also recommend that you measure everything that you possibly can measure. That comes back to the importance of data and showing incremental progress. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is basically the aim high formula. And so I hope that through this presentation, if you're able to read the book, that there might be a story in there or an action or a strategy of some sort that will help you in your life's journey become a great leader in this rather fractured world. At a minimum, I hope I have lived up to my affinity for lists, right? Because I gave you 3 actions and strategies underneath and 5-step repeatable process. So I got lots of lists within lists. But as I conclude, I just want to come back to what the central charge will be for the Cadets of today. And that charge very soon will be for you to lead us into the future. Lead us into a future where you'll be asked to solve complex and multifaceted problems. An ambiguous future. A future where the speed of relevance will become faster and faster, where your resolve will be tested many times, and where you will need to conquer the challenges of the world of our government, of our military, and of business. Your charge will soon be to lead us into a future where technology and change reign supreme, but where the most valuable resource will remain, as always, our people. And no matter what else you may do, do not fail them. Your charge will soon be to lead us into a future with a more diverse and inclusive workforce and help foster a culture of ethics and respect, and continual learning, excellence. For those who enter military service, you'll have an extra charge. You'll be asked to protect the lives of the men and women under your command, and you must lead them bravely and conscientiously, and you must represent America at its best. And finally, your charge will be to lead us into a future in which we never cease to pursue President Woodrow Wilson's original dream that he spoke of on the occasion of the first Armistice Day 100 years ago, when he said, and I quote, "Out of this victory, there arose new possibilities of political freedom and economic concert. The war showed us the strength of great nations acting together for high purpose. And the victory of arms foretells the enduring conquests which can be made in peace when nations act justly and in furtherance of the common interests of man." I thank you very much for your attention on this occasion. Again, happy birthday, VMI. And I think we have a few minutes, and I look forward to any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much, Madam Secretary. What a wonderful message on leadership in life that you delivered today. Very, very helpful to the Corps of Cadets. She's agreed to take a few questions. There are 2 microphones on either side here. Would you come forward for the first question?
Here we go. Always need one to break the ice.
Yeah, come on down to the microphone, please. There's a microphone right here.
What's next on your list?
The question is, what's next on your list?
Right. So this gentleman is going to put me to the task. Do I still have a plan A? And I actually do. My plan A consists of now learning and doing the best I can do at the world of corporate boards, which I'm relatively new at. And by the way, I have on my 2 public boards, I have mentors. I have people who have been there longer who I periodically will ask to give me some feedback about how they think I'm doing as a board member. So I want to specialize a little bit more in that and get reach a degree of excellence in that. And I also, this is maybe 5 years out on my plan A, I want to start a nonprofit of my own. I'd like to set up some sort of a foundation, take some of the money that I've made in my life, put it aside, and start an endeavor that will in some way contribute to the betterment of women and girls. Now, I haven't yet figured all of that out. You know, you have to have more of an idea than that, so that's only partially baked. But I want to do that. That's part of my plan A as well. Please.
Good morning, ma'am. I had a question. Did you have anything throughout your career, like any decisions you made or actions that you took that, looking back on it now, you wish you could do over? And if so, what were those and how would you do them over?
I do. There were a couple of programs in, actually when I was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Reserve Affairs, and General Peay may remember this one. Again, I was an advocate for our National Guard and Reserve Forces, and we wanted to use them more. Back in those days, they weren't used but for the training period and only if a World War III-like situation arose, which was virtually never. But we had the idea of let's plug them much more into operational missions on a day-to-day basis to try to bring down some of the heavy work of the active duty forces, so to make them a more integral team. And one of the issues of the day and why people said, well, we can't do that, is it would be unfair to pull someone regularly or more regularly out of their civilian job. They would undergo a lot of economic turmoil and whatnot. And so looking back on it, with insufficient investigation, so you remember my 5 phases, I launched too quickly. And we created, I wasn't the only one, but I was the top advocate for it, so I was responsible, something called mobilization insurance. And the idea was, in tough economic times, right, because the defense budget was down in the 1990s, there would be a self-funding program whereby reservists would pay into it if they wanted to participate, and then if they got called up, they would be able to get sort of a monthly check which would supplement their military pay. So we put this, got this through the Congress, put it in place, and reservists started to pay in, and within maybe a month, meaning the fund had not built up very much, within a month, Bosnia hit. And that was one of course, the major operations, and there was a fairly substantial call-up, and immediately the fund, which was supposed to pay the reservists, was depleted, so it had to come out of the general funds of the Department of Defense. All the reservists were paid as they had been promised, but the program overall was not considered successful because it indeed was not self-paying the way it was supposed to be. And it didn't last for too long. I think it lasted for about a year or two, and then it was eliminated. So as I go back on that one, that was an important lesson learned of the investigate phase. You know, have to understand the actuarial aspects of something like this much more than I did looking back on it. So that was a good lesson on the investigate phase.
Thank you, ma'am.
A few more questions? Okay.
I wrote it down. Because of the fast pace of defense jobs, have you ever been in a situation where you've been forced to make a decision when the best action was to simply do nothing?
I think I have certainly frequently been called upon to do something because of the urgency of the problem, and in a senior position like Secretary of the Air Force or Vice Chief of Staff of the Army or the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. These are very public roles. So you're under pressure to try to figure out the right thing and the right path forward. But the Congress is wanting answers and the press is asking questions. And so this is the public nature of it. So in times like that, I would submit you still don't want to announce or embark upon a major change path without having the investigate phase. But at a time like this, when you're under tremendous pressure to do something, there's where there are lesser types of approaches you can take. So for example, you can announce that you're going to study something, or you're going to, in effect, buy time, take some action, but buy time to allow you to get a proper investigate phase done. So that is certainly my recommendation to the senior leaders of today.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good morning, ma'am. My question to you is pertains to you talked about your time at SAIC and how your prior experience wasn't necessarily like what suited you to do that job, and you mentioned not obtaining an MBA. What would you recommend to those of us who are kind of looking to go that route, you know, work at places like SAIC, Agility, CACI? Would you say that obtaining an MBA is more prominent today or less prominent, or is it really just about getting your foot in the door at some of these places? Would you say that's necessary?
Having an MBA is a fantastic credential, but I would say it's more the latter, meaning get your foot in the door, because there are many different types of positions in companies. And as an entry-level person, you would fit well in for a technical type of a position, perhaps. My first job, and remember, I was sort of mid-career by the time I went into industry, but my first job was in business development. There's also contracts, there's finance, there's the whole array of functional types of jobs within companies like you mentioned. And by the way, Agility is now part of SAIC, right, so the number of companies has gotten somewhat smaller, but they've also grown. So I think get that first job in whatever your competence is, and remember, at wherever you are in your life, everybody's good at something, nobody's good at everything. That's where the self-awareness is, and then lead with your strengths. Lead with what you know you are strong at. Get your foot in that door, do the very best you can, and develop your competence in that job. Be a solution person to your boss, not a person who just brings problems to the boss, but also points out a problem and provides a proposed solution. And also, when it comes time for your performance review, be your own best advocate and put it out there what it is you aspire to do, what you would like to do. And the way I built the competence over time at SAIC, I started in business development, I became competent in that, and over time I was able to rotate and have other professional experiences across the company. I also took a number of short courses, so I never got an MBA, but I did a couple of those week-long courses at some of the top schools so that I brushed up on finance and learned some other aspects of the business. And then when my turn came to actually lead a business unit, once again, I was able to step back and say, now what am I good at? What am I not so good at? What are my weaknesses? And there's where you have to rely on the team. And it is the team that will really get the job done.
All right, thank you, ma'am.
Well, ma'am, on behalf of the superintendent, the faculty and staff, and the Corps of Cadets, we thank you very much for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thank you so much, Emma.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much.